right, now let's have the full discussion on malware threats. Now, we started a couple of these topics in the previous module in system hacking. We talked about rootkits, we talked about keyloggers, and we talked about backdoors. So now we're going to build on that previous discussion and talk about the offensive side, the creation, the deployment, the different variants, the usage, and the defensive side, or detecting malware, in the second half of the module. All right, so first off, some terminology. The introduction of malware. The term virus is often used as kind of a catch-all to describe any type of malicious software. I think you've got a virus on your system. Actually, I've got a remote access Trojan or a backdoor, but I get what you mean. So it's kind of like living in Atlanta where Coca-Cola is based, and I see you're drinking a Coke. Actually, it's an Orange Crush, but I know what you mean. So technically, there's specific characteristics attributed to specific types of malware, and that's where they take on the name or the label. So the Trojan, we're going to have a full slide dedicated to Trojans, so I'm going to revisit that. But the Trojan is going to be unauthorized inside of authorized, unknown inside of known, covert inside of overt. You've got something hiding inside that file that you don't know about that is seemingly harmless. Backdoors, any circumvention of front-end authentication or security can be considered a backdoor. Those can be put there purposefully by the manufacturer, or they can be put there by an attacker to maintain access, which is again stage 4 of the hacking cycle. Rootkits we looked at in system hacking, kits to provide root access. Oftentimes they prevent themselves or others from being discovered by suppressing returns to system calls, file system listings, registry objects, etc. Ransomware encrypts your data, holds it for ransom. That's a great business money-making model, although hugely damaging and really annoying if you've ever been infected by ransomware. It's also recommended that you don't pay the ransom because you may not actually get your data back. And that also means probably they're going to come back for more. So a couple of ethical debates around ransomware as well. All right, adware, annoying pop-up ads, not necessarily too dangerous, but really annoying. They may actually display pop-ups that spread download links from malicious software. Viruses create copies of themselves, encrypt or infect executable files, may encrypt themselves, may create mutated polymorphic versions, which are variants but still functionally intact. And the premise of the virus is it does have to infect executable files. Worms, on the other hand, are autonomous programs. They spread on their own. Worms spread through known vulnerabilities by sending themselves out to recipients in your address book, by populating download links on chat sites and so forth, but they're autonomous and auto-propagating. Spyware, we defined spyware in the previous module. It is software that spies on you in a variety of shapes and sizes, but it will send back useful information to the attacker for purposes of further exploitation or data exfiltration or identity theft, etc. And then botnets. Botnets are really just Trojans that participate in the collective. A bot becomes a part of the botnet, which is a bot army, and oftentimes those armies are designed to focus attacks on a primary target. We have a whole module on denial of service, so we're going to revisit botnets specifically in denial of service, but they're Trojans and they sometimes propagate in a worm-like fashion. Cryptors. Cryptors are meant to obscure the code, to hide the code, make it more difficult to detect or to analyze. If something's encrypted, it's hard to extract signature strings, and we'll see examples of what we're looking for in our dynamic and static analysis at the end of this module. So we will revisit the concept of cryptors. All right, different ways for malware to enter a system. How about this? Any way I can copy a file onto your box and get you to execute it. There you go. Instant messenger application, portable hardware removable devices, browser and email software bugs, insecure patch management, downloading files from the internet, email attachments, and the list goes on. So however you can get that file to your victim system, Whether you coerce them into downloading something that looks too good to be true, you socially engineer them, you plant it there directly with a downloader or installer agent, however you get it there is an effective distribution or infection vector. All right, common techniques attackers use to distribute malware on the web. Now, when I put malware out there just to be discovered and downloaded without directly coercing any one individual, then you're going to treat it like web marketing, potentially, right? Black hat search engine optimization, ranking malware pages highly in search results, clickjacking, clicking on innocent-looking web pages. A clickjacking vulnerability allows for a transparent iframe to be inserted over a legitimate link. So you think you're clicking on the link. In fact, you're clicking on the clear button over it, which you can't see because it's clear, and that redirects you to a malicious site. Spear phishing sites, we'll talk more about spear phishing and phishing in the social engineering module. Malvertising, embedding malware in ad networks. So again, adware can assist with the distribution and the advertising. Compromise legitimate websites. I've flat out exploited a real website and installed malware. The most common infection vector is a drive-by download. Just by visiting a web page, you can download and install malicious data or malicious scripts, exploiting flaws in the browser just by visiting a web page. Spam emails, enough said there. And then RTF injection, injecting malicious macros in a rich text format file and tricking users to open the malicious document. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about macros and embedded JavaScript a little bit later in the module. All right, the components of malware. All right, so the cryptor, the obfuscator, the packer. Okay, these are all meant to evade detection or make it difficult to analyze. We're going to take a look at strings extraction, which is what a lot of our analysis utilities really do. They look for human readable text, identify malicious strings, DLLs, and so forth. That stuff's all in the clear. If it's encrypted or if it's encoded with an obfuscation utility, or if it's packed, which is compressed, then those signatures aren't actually left intact. So they're either compressed or they're encrypted. It makes it more difficult to analyze. The downloader, the dropper. Downloaders are not the malware itself. They're going to download the file to the system when nobody's looking. The dropper is an installation utility, and it's meant to install the malware initially in the infection phase. So that typically does include the installation file, and that typically can get scanned and identified as well. The exploit, this picks up on our Metasploit discussion from the previous module. The exploit is the code that exploits the vulnerability. The payload is the functionality I deliver along with the exploit. Interpreter session, VNC server DLL injection, et cetera, et cetera. Injectors will inject the software into another running process to evade detection potentially. I'm going to show you examples of injected processes when we build our Trojan. And then malicious code, that's just kind of a catch-all for anything malicious in nature. So we have some assistance, we have some cover types of utilities, and we have the actual malicious payload and delivery vehicles themselves. All right, a potentially unwanted application or applications. These are sometimes referred to as grayware or junkware. When you download a file from, say, a third-party download site, you don't pay attention while you go through the download and accept the license agreement. And then before you know it, your home page has changed. You got browser extensions, you got weird pop-up ads. Those are examples of potentially unwanted applications or programs. So when you download something, you may get more than you expected, and it may actually be somewhat malicious, probably hugely annoying, and you got to go back and actually remove everything. All right, so potentially unwanted programs will also get picked up by AV detection. We're going to be looking at that in the second half of this module. All right, adware. Annoying pop-up ads. Enough said. You get weird pop-ups. They jump right in front of your active application. They're annoying. They're like mosquitoes that need to be swatted. Not too terribly dangerous by themselves, but they may deliver messages, download links, and so forth. They may assist in spreading Links to websites, click on it, drive-by download, that sort of thing. They can also tap your system resources a bit. All right, the Advanced Persistent Threat, or APT, there's actually two definitions to APT. One is a extremely motivated, skilled hacker group working towards a common goal. And the other is a malware infection on your system that remains undetected for an extended period of time. So something makes it inside or past your perimeter security, it installs itself, nobody noticed, and over an extended period of time, it is sending data off to the attacker. Advanced persistent threat. They go unnoticed for extended periods of time. And the information obtained during APT attacks, you could just add anything of interest, classified documents, user credentials, network information, etc. All right, the life cycle just kind of defines a timeline here: preparation, initial intrusion, expansion, persistence, search and exfiltration, and then cleanup. Now, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the specifics of each stage of the cycle. We mentioned these earlier with the MITRE ATT&CK framework and Diamond and the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. So those are meant to just give you kind of an overview of the cycle. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time differentiating between one phase or the other. All right, what is a Trojan? Well then, that calls for a clean whiteboard and a nice fresh screen drawing. All right, a Trojan is named after the Trojan horse story. So you got a giant wooden horse that's presented at the gates of the city of Troy by Spartan soldiers. They didn't know that. Thought it was this wonderful gift at the front gate. There's soldiers hiding inside. The horse is wheeled in through the gates. They close the gates. Nightfall comes, everybody goes to sleep. Hatch opens in the side of the horse. Spartan soldiers jump out, open the front gates. They come in and kill everybody. Now, I'm sure I'm butchering that story just a little bit, but I'm summarizing. But it was an unexpected payload residing inside of a seemingly harmless carrier file, which is what Trojans are. When I download that tic-tac-toe game or that Tetris game or that cracked application that I would otherwise have to pay $500 or $600 for, I'm getting something that I think is useful, potentially too good to be true, as a cover or a decoy. When I install it, the dropper installs the Trojan. The Trojan maintains persistence, sets up auto starts, and provides either a reverse connection back to the attacker or a listener for accepting direct connections. So here's kind of the deal on how a Trojan infection is going to work. And I will walk through this, create the wrapper, the dropper, propagate, and connect. All right, let's say that we are the attacker and we are outside the firewall. All right, you little guy. At, say, a public IP address of 209.1.1.1. All right, let's say that I post a Trojan out on the internet. That's the internet, by the way. Those are supposed to be continents. No cracks about my artwork or my accuracy of my geography. All right, so I put a Trojan out there on the internet, and somebody downloads it. Unsuspecting victim. So I coerce them to installing the Trojan, and it gets installed on their machine and sets up, say, a port 6666 listener, all right, which is actually the IRC, and that's an ear, by the way. And its IP address is 10.0.0. say 200. Okay, so the attacker is never going to know that the Trojan's been installed in this box unless they target the user directly. So if I put it out there in a file download share somewhere, anybody and everybody can download it. If I directly target a victim, then I might have an idea of where they are. But when this thing gets installed and sets up a listener, that's a problem. The attacker can't get, first off, doesn't know it's been installed. Second off, 10.0.0.200 is an unroutable address. And third off, the firewall is not going to allow port 6666 traffic in. Most likely, that's an IRC port. So your better option is a reverse connection covert channel utilization. All right, so reverse connection tells the victim to call back out to the attacker. So now the attacker doesn't have to know where the victim is. The victim just has to know where the attacker is. Now, you've already, if you've done your labs for Module 6, you've already looked at reverse connection. setting up that reverse connection back to a handler or listener. So this guy calls back to the attacker, but on an open channel of like 4444 or 6666, the firewall is probably not going to allow that either. So reverse connection, we're getting there, but a covert channel is the unauthorized use of an overt channel. So instead of using a direct connection, we're going to use allowable communications channels like port 80 or port 443. All right, port 80 has some problems since that's clear text and it can be inspected. So if I use port 80, IDS can actually inspect that traffic and identify a malicious payload, or that doesn't look like HTTP traffic. If I use port 443, however, that's SSL TLS, and that is a nice encrypted, darkened limousine ride right out the front gates. That's the best way to do it. Use an encrypted reverse connection using an allowable protocol. So reverse connecting encrypted connections are your best option for evading restrictions outbound and also evading detection. That whole concept is the covert channel. All right, so the Trojan gets activated upon file being run or whatever. We're going to walk through that here in a second. And once activated, it performs certain predefined actions like setting up a backdoor, or Trojans can be very dedicated or specific, e-banking and a bunch of other flavors. And we'll see an example slide here in a bit that lays out the different types of Trojans. But they all share the same common characteristic: unknown inside of known, harmful inside of non-harmful, overt inside of covert, etc. All right, so how hackers use Trojans? How about this? You own the box any way you like. Delete or replace critical operating system files, generate fake traffic. Well, that makes it a bot. So we'll talk more about that in our denial of service module. Record screenshots, audio, and video of the victim's PC. Use the victim's PC for spamming and blasting. Download spyware, adware. You own that box. And if you install it under a privileged account, you really own that box. So that's one of the reasons we don't log in as an administrator all day long, because if we download that tic-tac-toe or that Tetris game, then the Trojan that installs under that wrapper file is going to have admin access too. So I'll show you examples of most of this here in our example demo proof of concept Trojan Beast. All right, types of Trojans. Remote access, backdoor, botnet, rootkit, e-banking, point of sale, defacement, service protocol, mobile and IoT. Absolutely. Mobile devices and IoT devices, they're little computers, plain and simple. They can get attacked and infected and compromised exactly the same way a desktop or a server can. Security software disabler, destructive, DDoS attack, and then command shell Trojans. I'll show you an example of Netcat, which is one of the classic command shell Trojans. We're going to use that in our dynamic malware analysis segment. So lots of different Trojans, lots of different flavors of Trojans based on what functionality that they provide. All right, how to infect systems using a Trojan. Number one, create a new Trojan packet. Number two, employ a dropper or downloader to install the malicious code on the target system. Step three, employ a wrapper to bind the Trojan to a legitimate file, make it look good. Step four, employ a crypter to encrypt the Trojan. Step five, propagate the Trojan by various methods. Step six, deploy the Trojan on the victim's machine. And step seven, engage or access the Trojan. Execute the damage routine, whatever that may be. All right, so I'm going to be using a classic Trojan called Beast that I've been using ever since I started teaching CEH. It is always rock solid reliable. It never fails, which I can't really say that about most other Trojans. Some of them get kind of temperamental, but it also is, it was originally written for 2000, 2003 and XP. When Vista came out, the project support was dropped in favor of some additional projects. And actually a friend of mine and I almost bought the Beast project once upon a time, and updates for Vista and so forth. The discussions then got a little bit out of hand and wanted to sell the domain and all this stuff. And we kind of said, all right, yeah, we're not, don't want to buy the domain, but we almost bought the Beast project. Once upon a time, it would have been really cool to say, hey, we own this project. But anyway, so it doesn't work on any later versions of the OS without setting application compatibility. But I've become kind of a creature of habit with the demonstrations. I'm going to show you actually 2 Trojans. In the lab, you're going to use NJRAT. NJRAT will run on current versions of the operating system. The Beast is kind of near and dear to my heart, so I'm going to use that for the bulk of the demonstration. We're going to create the dropper, we're going to wrap it, we're going to deploy it, and we're going to examine the functionality that's provided by the Beast Trojan. All right, so I'm going to start off with, on my 2019 machine, I'm going to copy Beast out to the desktop. And inside of Beast, I've already got a server built. Now, that server looks a little bit suspicious, wouldn't you say? If you see a generic exe icon, you want to back away slowly from that file and not execute it because it looks suspicious. This graffiti.exe, that looks kind of weird. It's got a kind of a dated icon here, but it's got an icon. Your average user is not going to be as suspicious. And then the Beast 2.07, well, that's got a cool alien head icon. That's just cool. So I'm going to delete the server.exe file, and we're going to start from scratch. This graffiti is the wrapper file, and I'm going to use that to bind the Trojan. So I'm going to double-click the Beast 2.07 exe file, and I'm going to go to the build server option. All right, under the build server option, I've got the ability to set up a reverse connection, connect back to me, or set up a direct connection. Now, since I'm inside the perimeter, I'm going to use the direct connection versus the reverse. So I'm going to connect to it versus it calling back out to me. I'm also going to inject into Internet Explorer. It's going to make it look like Internet Explorer is running, but in fact, it's Beast. It'll start the process, inject itself into the process, and kick the process out of itself, take over the process. Everything you identify or detail or enumerate about that process points to Internet Explorer. You want to be sure to not use and inject into something that wouldn't open a network connection like Notepad, because that might look a little bit weird. Our notifications. This is where you can set up the session initiation notification connect back IP or DNS address. I'm using a direct connection, so I'm not going to worry about that. You can notify by email, by ICQ or CGI. So again, ICQ and CGI, that dates it a little bit, but it's a classic. It's a vintage Trojan. All right, startup options. We'll talk more about auto starts later in the module, but this can set up an ActiveX component setup or set up a COM service in HKey local machine or HKey current user. Startups ensure that the Trojan runs every time the system reboots or every time the user logs in. Avian firewall kill. Now you're talking. I can configure it to kill initially 381 executables out of the box, and I could put in the AV or firewall of my choice. Eric's AV. Find the process and kill it. You can select up to 500 EXE names to kill, and then set it to kill on an interval of, say, every 5 seconds. You can also tell it to disable the XP, which nowadays would be the Windows firewall, to prevent it from being restricted by the firewall. All right, I'm going to set miscellaneous options, potentially melt server on install, which deletes the dropper file. Enable the keylogger, absolutely, why not have a keylog file? Clear restore points so that it can't be restored away. Open port when online only, et cetera, et cetera. And then the EXE icon, this actually does date it a little bit vintage, but you can choose an icon of your choice. So I'm going to choose an icon from any icon file, any EXE or any DLL. I'm actually not going to worry about that right now because when I bind it, I'm going to choose the icon for the graffiti.exe. All right, I'm going to save the server. Server's been saved with my settings in the current directory and is now ready for running our bindings. There it is again, but that doesn't look good. So I want to bind that, add the file, server.exe, add another file, graffiti.exe, choose the icon for graffiti.exe, all right, and then bind the files. I'm going to put it on the desktop. We'll call this Trust Me. USTME. My gosh. Mavis Beacon gave me my money back. All right, TrustMe.exe is now ready to rock. So now I need to distribute it, and I'm going to do that actually through the demo tools folder. So I'm going to do it through NetBIOS file sharing. Now in your lab, you are also propagating your Trojans through, say, NetBIOS file sharing by putting it in the shared drive on the Windows 12 machine, Windows 11 machine. I'm still in the habit of saying Windows 10. So I'm going to copy Trust Me to my share, and I'm going to then access it from my victim system. There's trustme.exe. So we're going to consider that propagated. I'm going to double click on it, and I get, again, vintage wrapper file. I get distracted by this riveting game of tic-tac-toe with a street wrapper. And meanwhile, the dropper is being installed in the background. All right, so I'm going to go and kill the process. So if you notice, I've got iexplore.exe running in the task manager. I don't see that running in the system tray. Exactly. So I've got this guy actually on my 2003 and my 2000 systems, and I can actually even put on my 2016 machine. This just demonstrates I can actually run on a later system as well. You have to run it in compatibility mode. So it actually will run, but you have to automate compatibility mode. And it's going to fail on me. All right. We're not going to worry about it right now. All right. So on my 2019 machine, I've done 2019. I wonder why it doesn't work on 2016. I'm going to connect to the beast. And go beast. Womp. Connected. All right. So what can I do now? What do you want to do now? I want to upload and download files. No problem. Full file manager. Find drives. Select drive. C drive. Folder structure. Upload, download. Directories, files, rename files, run file, run hidden, open file, attributes, delete directory. You've got more functionality here than you have the native Windows Explorer. That's good stuff. So full file manager, upload, download files. So let's say, for example, from the desktop, I want to download the trustme.exe back, download file. It actually shows up in the beast directory. Now I've got a download folder, and there's the trustme.exe file. All right, so full file manager, got it. I have a full registry editor. Registry editor, ugh, who cares about that? Nobody likes editing the registry manually. It's a little bit cryptic, and usually you go in with a specific key to set, but it's one of the most powerful configuration managers we have, because everything you configure in the GUI ultimately gets set in the registry anyway. So you'd be able to do things through this you wouldn't be able to do necessarily through the GUI. So that's actually powerful mojo right there. Full registry editor. Turn on LM hash storage, for example. All right, screen, remote desktop. All right, we've seen that a few times. That's just VNC. That's old news, Eric. Webcam. If this had a webcam, we could view the remote webcam. Creepy, video surveillance. Running apps, task manager, kill the app. Processes, full process manager, where I can refresh or kill processes. Probably don't want to kill the iExplorer, that would drop my connection. I have a full service manager. Set up auto start, start, stop. Full clipboard manager. This is hidden from yesterday. I can actually set the text and lock the text on the victim system. This is kind of fun. It is not going to let me. Wow. All right. You're hacked, my friend. Set the text. And there we go. Set their clipboard and then lock it so they can't change it. So some of this stuff might be somewhat annoying, but not too terribly dangerous. And that's where it gets into the fun stuff and the lamer stuff. Turn the screen upside down, swap out the mouse buttons, that sort of thing. All right, password manager. Okay, this one actually doesn't have any protected storage passwords. My 2003 box does. We'll go beast, go to passwords. Oh, I neglected to install the storage plugin. We'll go ahead and do that. Upload, close, and boom, there's an old Dropbox password from years ago. All right, so we're getting the idea. Pretty multifaceted GUI-based interface. And that's just the first aisle. Windows, hide everything, crash everything, power off, reboot, shut down, etc. Lamer stuff, hide icons, hide the system tray, hide the start button. Fun stuff, hide the mouse, set up a chat, set their wallpaper, send them to a embarrassing URL. You can update the server, also choose to close or kill it. Miscellaneous, there's a scanner. There's also live keystrokes as their type, which is kind of cool. A little bit of a lag, but here it comes. Eric is now being logged in real time. Keylogger, I can download the log file, which you've seen a keylogger in action in the spyware lab in the previous module. I'm going to download it to the desktop. And there's my log file. All right. So that's the beast. And again, it is a vintage dated Trojan. You got other Trojans that have all the same features, not necessarily as fun of an interface, that run on newer versions of the operating system. In the lab, you're going to be using a Trojan called NJRAT, and I'm going to run through that build here really quickly, but again, you'll be doing it in the lab. All right, so this one works on 2019, 2022, and later, if there is a later 2022. So all the current ones. Oops. NJRAT. Okay, there's a server exe already created. When I open this up, I start the listener, I go to the builder, I specify my local IP for the connect back, and build. I'm going to overwrite the previous server, and now on my 2016 machine, didn't finish the build. All right, when I double click on it, it's going to connect back. And it will take a second for the connection to be established. This one sometimes requires a recompilation as well. So Beast has always been old faithful, massively stable. There it is, my connection. And I've got managers, file manager, process manager, and so forth. And again, that's on a 2016 machine. But I love the Beast, been using it for years, so that's why I still use it for the demo. And it's never failed, ever. Hail to the mighty Beast. All right, so that's a little bit on creating the Trojan. Now, I did everything except the cryptor to encrypt the Trojan. That would involve like Sway's cryptor or another utility to actually add a encryption, decryption stub to it. And then that's part of the execution. You can still identify cryptors, but the cryptor itself, the code can still be identified. But if something is encrypted, and we're going to talk more about this in the detection side of things, it's difficult to scan or inspect. All right, so we've done the creation of a Trojan, and we have kits for this. So it's kind of disconcerting that we have kits to put all this stuff together, but we do. Again, a lot of it's for proof of concept and education, but it most definitely can be used to create live malware. All right, I already employed the dropper or the downloader. That was my trustme.exe file. I didn't use a downloader. Downloaders are just an additional agent. So the idea is you get the downloader on the system. It looks around, nobody's looking. It establishes an encrypted connection, then downloads the malware and installs it. All right, the wrapper. We looked at the wrapper. I used the Beast binder for that. The cryptor, we didn't go through the encryption process, but Sways, Snip, Baba Data, and so forth, all examples of cryptors. And then we deployed it through a direct NetBIOS file share. But you can most definitely put links to Dropbox locations or Google Drive. And back in the day, you would just send out the exe attachments as an email, which you just, I shudder when I think about 2002, 2003, all those exe games that were going around via email and how much of that was probably infected with the Trojan. Just shudder. All right, deploying a Trojan through covert channels. Again, a covert channel is just any unauthorized use of an allowable communications channel. So the best way to develop and establish a covert channel or utilize a covert channel is for it to be encrypted, no doubt about it. All right, proxy servers. Trojans can be proxy servers, or you can use proxy servers to hijack connections and redirect to malicious websites. We're going to talk about that, have the initial discussion of proxy servers in sniffing, and then we're going to have another installment on that discussion in session hijacking, and we're going to use proxy servers to hijack and redirect traffic. All right, USB flash drives, leaving USB sticks laying around for people to happen upon. Oh, look at that. Somebody lost their thumb drive. I wonder what's on it. And they're being socially engineered because they want you to install the thumb drive and execute the file on the thumb drive. Call that road apple attacks or baiting. All right, then the techniques for evading antivirus software. All right, so no matter what they tell you, there's still a heavy reliance on signature-based detection. We've used it for decades. It's less likely to produce false positives than other types of analysis, but it doesn't catch signatures or files we don't have a signature for. That's the big problem with signature-based detection, is that you have to tell the detection engine exactly what to look for. The signature string is then searched for in a file or an integrity check of the file. But if that signature string has been altered or encoded or packed or whatever, then it doesn't read correctly and it can't be identified. So techniques for evading signature-based detection are to break the Trojan file into multiple pieces, zip them as a single file. I'm not real sure I like the way that's worded. How about this? You take a single file, you fragment it into pieces with WinZip or WinRAR, and each individual file fragment is reassembled to create a single file on the reassembly side on the destination system. But each individual file, if you split the signature, doesn't contain the full signature. Always write your own Trojan. If you write your own Trojan, it's never been seen before, and there is no signature for it. Changing the syntax, converting an exe to a VB script. There was a utility called Stealth Tools that we used to have a couple labs for in CH version 4 and 5. Never was too terribly thrilled with it. Sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. Changing an exe extension to .docexe, PPT, or PDF. Since Windows hides known extensions by default, it shows up as a .doc.pdf. And if you change the icon, it makes it look like a Microsoft Office document or a PDF file. That still gets scanned because it's still an executable extension. Change the content using a hex editor. Change the checksum and encrypt the file. Now, in all likelihood, if you go randomly tinkering around with a hex editor, there's a good chance you're going to corrupt the file and it's not going to work anyway, but it's possible. And then never use Trojans downloaded from the web. That goes back to always write your own Trojan. Signature-based detection. Now, heuristics and other types of detection look for suspicious functions, and we're going to talk about that in the second half of this module. So we're going to revisit that. So these are techniques that deal with or rely on signature-based recognition. All right, exploit kits. We got Trojan kits, we got virus kits, we got worm kits. It stands to reason we have exploit kits too. These are kits that allow us to build, deliver, and control exploits and payloads, Trojans, spyware backdoors. We just saw an example of one with the Beast Trojan. A little bit less multifaceted, but still a construction kit. And then viruses. Okay, there used to be two modules. This malware threats module used to be two modules. It used to be Trojans and backdoors and viruses and worms. It was then merged to create malware threats. So you can still see kind of the division between the Trojan discussion and viruses. Viruses are self-replicating programs. They produce a copy by attaching itself to another program, boot sector, anything that automatically executes so that their code can execute right alongside the host code. Okay, the purpose of creating viruses: inflict damage, financial benefits, vandalism, play pranks. You have the purpose of creating malware is, again, a laundry list of reasons, but it applies pretty much to any flavor. So we don't really need to revisit propagation vectors or purposes of. It's just another flavor of malware, and we've already established why malware is created and how it's created. All right, but creating a virus, if you need to satisfy the infect executable files and make copies of itself, this simple bat file would actually fit the bill, right? Copy to game.bat, delete Windows C ***. That's a malicious payload. Delete all files in the Windows directory. And then if it infects other bat files and writes itself in, it satisfies that propagation requirement. All right, you can also create a virus using a construction kit. Delm's Batch Virus Maker, JPS. You'll be using JPS Virus Maker in your lab. And then virus hoaxes have been around for decades. False alarms claiming about a non-existent virus that may contain virus attachments. So you may have received an email once or twice in your life that says, hey, nasty virus floating around, install this patch and you'll be protected. And the patch itself is actually the virus. Or install this fake antivirus and it's the malware itself. All right, ransomware. We already defined ransomware. We're kind of revisiting the term again. So WannaCry, Petya, great examples of ransomware. Black Cat, CryptoLocker, encrypts your stuff, holds it for ransom, turns the screws up every so often. The price goes up after 7 days. You pay the ransom, you may or may not get your stuff back. All right, the best countermeasure for ransomware is to have protected, non-encrypted backups, secure backups that can't be encrypted when the malware encrypts your data. All right, the computer worm. Okay, the worm is an autonomous program. It spreads on its own, may deliver a malware payload. So it may piggyback virus infections and so forth. Worms may detect vulnerabilities in transport mechanisms and so forth. The SQL Slammer worm, MS Blaster, a couple of classics from years ago, those use that RPC DCOM exploit that I demonstrated in vulnerability analysis. So worms propagate on their own. They may actually replicate through repetitive emails to people in your contact, through address book, that sort of thing. All right, we got construction kits for worms too. The Internet Worm Maker thing, which you're actually gonna be doing a lab on. All right, open source tool for creating worms, infecting files, drives, show messages, disable antivirus software. And then fileless malware. So what is fileless malware? It would be malware that doesn't rely on the installation of files, doesn't leave a footprint or file footprint in the system, stays off the disk. So sometimes referred to as non-malware, infects without writing to the hard disk. They reside inside a system's RAM, injects malicious code into running processes, Word, Flash, PDF, JavaScript, PowerShell, etc. And it becomes stealthy. It is stealthy in nature. It's living off the land using default system tools, things that have probably already been whitelisted. And trustworthy, since it's using native system utilities, they're already trusted or have been approved in whitelisting or never, disapproved with blacklisting. So the whole idea there is you remain stealthy because you're just using normal system functionality. All right, fileless malware will either infect documents, malicious macro codes, inject itself into memory. This is actually a little bit of a flow chart on the Eternal Blue vulnerability, SMB1, memory injection. They may also launch through scripts, right? Fileless performed using scripts. Binaries and shellcodes are embedded, obfuscated, and compiled to avoid file creations on the disk. You may actually have scripts loaded from like registry key locations. Pretty much anything that doesn't rely on the installation of a detectable file could fall into the fileless malware category. All right, maintaining persistence. Again, fileless malware does not use disk files to spread its infection or maintain persistence. Again, it may develop load points to restart infected payloads. For example, registry key locations for configurations, application files, and settings. Allows it to execute itself with every system restart. Now, in the second half of this module, we're going to look at the detection side of things, and we'll take a look at registry key locations and other types of auto starts. All right, but PowerShell is a big one with fileless techniques. All right, then the sheep dip computer is introduced, and that actually signifies our transition from offensive or construction, deployment, utilization, and obfuscation to detective. Now, typically, detective is one of the primary objectives of the forensics course. So what we touch on in this half of the malware threats module, we expand on tremendously in CHFI. So I'm going to show you a couple of things from CHFI, just to give you a feel for some of the tools that we use in CHFI. But the sheep dip computer itself is a staging area. You could use the term sandbox, virtual machine lab environment. The sheep dip comes from literally dipping a sheep into pesticides before you deliver it or you introduce it to the flock. So you got a sheep, you don't want to infect the rest of the flock, you dip it in pesticides to kill any creepy crawlies or parasites or whatever, and then it can join the rest of the flock. So the sheep dip computer originally was a staging area for physical media to analyze it for malware before you introduced it to the production network. These days, the term sheep dip really means any sandbox laboratory analysis workstation that runs user group permission process monitors, port and network, file and driver, and registry and kernel. All right, so we're going to do some of this manually and some of this as like a submission to VirusTotal. All right, antivirus sensor systems. Okay, antivirus, again, has relied heavily historically on signature-based detection, but you have heuristics, you have code execution, you've got IDS detection, sandboxing, are all methods for detecting malware as well outside of the standard conventional signature-based scan. So we'll talk a little bit more about signatures and statistics here in just a second, but the introduction to malware analysis is, okay, first off, posing why do we do malware analysis? To exactly determine what happened, determine malicious intent, identify indicators of compromise. How about this? So we can learn about it to minimize the damage it does going forward, right? Identify characteristics, what registry keys are created and so forth, so that we can detect it and neutralize it more quickly. All right, it comes in two flavors. You've got static, which is also known as code analysis, which means not running the code under any circumstances. Dynamic, also known as behavioral analysis, you run the malware and look at what it tries to do. It's recommended you perform both, and it's recommended that you perform both in a secure, safe environment like a virtual machine that's been set up on an air-gapped physical machine. All right, preparing the test bed. Allocate a physical system for the analysis lab. It's best to have it physically air-gapped. Step 2, install a virtual machine or hypervisor on the system. Step 3, install the guest OS. Step 4, isolate the guest OS. Ensure that the NIC is in host-only mode. Also disabling shared folders and guest isolation, simulating internet services so that when it tries to call home, it's responded to using things like iNetSim, install malware analysis tools, generate your baseline hashes, copy the malware over the guest OS, and analyze. All right, static malware analysis. Again, we do not run the malware code. They say there's no need to create a safe environment. It's recommended you still do it in a safe environment because what happens if you accidentally execute it? So there you go. All right, some of the static malware analysis techniques are going to be file fingerprinting, local and online malware scanning, string search. Heck, we've got a dedicated slide for each one of these, so let's just get to it. All right, I'm going to use, on my 2019, we're going to actually use the Beast Trojan. I'm sorry, the Netcat Trojan and the Beast Trojan for our analysis. Let's copy Netcat over. I'm going to do the same thing on my 2003 with Netcat. Okay, I don't need that second tag there. All right, so really quickly, this is just, Netcat is a extremely useful network administration Swiss Army knife. But being so useful, it's heavily misused for remote access. Netcat set up a listener on port 79, detach from console, execute cmd.exe. So this is setting up a listener on port 79, and then it's interfacing directly with cmd.exe, thus giving a command shell inbound and outbound from a raw socket connection on port 79. All right, we'll let that run. All right, so file fingerprinting gives you a unique message digest of the file. What does this tell you about the file? Zero. But it does give you a unique message digest, which does give you a unique signature for the file. So this can be cross-referenced with online databases of known malicious software. But the file hash itself tells you zero about the file. It's just a unique fingerprint. Then you've got local and online malware scanning. A local scan is going to restrict you to one antivirus engine. I had a guy from McAfee Security in a CHFI course years ago, and I remember this vividly. He says, yes, we pick up about 30 to 35% of known threats. 30 to 35%. Let's see, an A is 90%, a B is 80, a C is 70, a D is 60, an F is 50, and we're down in the 30s. Not a real high percentage. But if you look at the number of malware variants we know about, you can never have a definitions file that has entries for everything. Your system performance would be horrible. So it's the chef's choice for the AV on what they actually include in that definitions file. So you're going to find different engines detecting different malware, and no one solution picks up everything. So VirusTotal is a great option, since they're going to run your malware against about 70 different engines and give you a hit ratio from each engine. So let's go ahead and submit our Trust Me to VirusTotal. Oops. I'm going to choose a file from my desktop, trustme.exe. Okay, now if you blinked, you missed it, but it created a hash and it then checked if the hash was on file. It wasn't. So now I'm going to confirm the upload, and up it goes. Enqueues the file for analysis, and then it's going to start running it against multiple engines and gives me a real-time update as it goes. So far, most everything say that thing is bad news, but not everything. There's a few here that didn't detect it. Now, that older Trojan has fallen off the radar with some of these AV engines, most likely. Okay, but now, once it completes, just to show you an example, if I go back to VirusTotal and I submit that same file again, watch what happens. Now it's been seen before. Bing, check the hash. Oh yeah, we've seen it like 13 seconds ago, but now it's on file. So if you submit it to VirusTotal, they're gonna hold that information and they're gonna share that with the security community. So it's not in an attacker's best interest to check their files against VirusTotal because they're kind of tipping their hand to the security community. All right, so VirusTotal has completed the scan. 56 out of 69 say that thing is malicious. Bad news. But 13 said it's okay. So if I know my victim is using one of these 13 or 14 engines, then game on. Super anti-spyware, Palo Alto F-Secure, didn't detect it. Nice. All right, so there's other options, Cuckoo Sandbox, Joti, Valkyrie, and so forth, but VirusTotal is, you can't go wrong with VirusTotal. All right, string searches. All right, strings extraction. I'm gonna run through, I'm gonna show you a little CHFI sneak peek here. So on my 2019 box, ooh, it's gonna start barking at me. Boy, I got a lot of this last demo, mountains or hills. All right, let that sit. All right, I'm gonna load up the CHFI demo tool from our malware forensics module and load up PE Studio. All right, I'm going to run my trustme.exe against PE Studio, and we're gonna let that cook for a second. Right off the bat, it lights up like a Christmas tree. VirusTotal hits, DOS header size, and it's gonna start extracting strings and suspicious information. So we'll let that cook for a second. Okay, strings in general, if you've ever opened a binary file in a text editor, you see human readable text. So strings are ASCII or Unicode or resource strings, and they are error messages, they're calls to the local OS. They can be clues about what the file is designed to do. We're gonna hold off on the strings analysis of Netcat until we get into the dynamic side of things. So we're gonna revisit that. But some of these dependencies and API calls and so forth, they're looking for strings that indicate specific system calls. All right, pack and obfuscation methods. The general rule of thumb is if a file is packed, it's suspicious. Packers compress the file's footprint. Disk space is not nearly as much of a concern these days as it was. When you compress something, you alter the signature. So if you've got a signature in the file and it's been compressed, the signature no longer matches the signature, right? Or the file no longer matches the signature. So utilities like PEID can identify Packer signatures, and actually VirusTotal does that for us. So if I go to my submission and I go to the details and scroll on down, I see a PEID check. It defined FSG BART XT. So that file has been packed. I don't need to run the local utility if VirusTotal does it for me. Oh, wait a minute. So, wow, yeah, if VirusTotal does a lot of this for me, why do I need the individual utilities locally? You wouldn't, not necessarily, because some of these are running the same utility anyway on VirusTotal. So if it's packed, it's suspicious. All right, ELF malware. Okay, there's ELF and there's portable executables, there's Linux files and Windows files, but you can use different utilities to extract those strings. You're going to do a lab on Detect It Easy or Die, which is an application for determining a file's compiler, linker, packer, etc., using signature-based detection. You got a lab on that. All right, finding portable executable information. Okay, there's a variety of pieces of information that some's kind of boring, to be honest with you. Date and time of compilation, functions, architecture. I would know it's an x386 architecture. Link libraries, icons, menus, and so forth. PE Explorer will actually extract a lot of this for you. And speaking of which, Oh, don't have that actual one in the PID. That's just the Packer. Thought I had P Explorer. Maybe not. All right, so P Explorer is one of dozens of PE analysis tools that allow you to view the portable executable information. So in my virus total submission, I get some of that, again, for free. Portable executable info. Intel 386 or later processors, I could have told you that. Compilation timestamp, entry point, contained sections, etc. All right, the imports, the kernel 32 DLL, this identifies import functions or calls that the application pulls from the OS, which can also give you some insight into what the file is doing. So the DLL and then the actual imports or functions are also enumerated, and typically a freestanding utility or standalone utility like Dependency Walker can show you that as well. Speaking of Dependency Walker, there it is. So again, you have individual utilities that can target these particular files, or you can get the whole ball of wax in a single submission, like with Virus Total. All right, disassembly. Generally not my thing. Not a developer. I don't do a lot of advanced reverse engineering. Disassemblers and debuggers, not really my thing. So IDA Pro or Ghidra are probably your best two examples of disassemblers. Compiled code, Gen 3 languages or higher that are compiled down to machine code, you can't fully reverse back to the Gen 3 language. The best you can do is reverse everything to assembly instructions, which gives you Gen 2. That's still a lot of information to go through. So disassemblers allow you to analyze the code in assembly language. They also map out the function flow and so forth. And you do have a lab on IDA Pro, but it's basics and runs you through some of the usage. So again, not typically my thing. Ghidra was actually released by the NSA a few years ago. I hear good things about that one, also monster powerful. All right, then we get into the dynamic malware analysis. So in dynamic, it's behavioral based. All right, malware is executed on the system to understand its behavior after infection, and we look at what it does. You look at a differencing between baseline and in installed states, or you look at the actual behavior. You look at processes executed, network connections open, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so one of the first things you're going to look at is port monitoring. So we're going to swing back to our netcat utility, which I've got listening on port 79. Oh, speaking of which, looks like we're actually done with the PE Studio. All right, so indicators. All right, it runs through file references, strings tagged to blacklist, file contains another file. It's scored by a virus total. There's your virus total hits. Then you get into the strings. All right, and these are all the actual strings, and the offsets and locations in ASCII. So we start looking through these, you'll see things like load library, get proc address, those are import functions. You'll sometimes see URLs for downloading or connecting. You'll see error messages, imports, APIs, and so forth. So there's 15,862 unique strings discovered. All right, you've actually got a zip compression and not a bad bit of data for a single utility. So again, if you're interested in diving deeper into that, definitely come back for the CHFI course. All right, so port monitoring. All right, so I do a netstat. And it shows me active connections. I do a netstat TAC-AN. It shows me active and listening. If I scroll up, I'm going to see a port 79 listener, which means I've got something waiting for a connection, but it hasn't been established. If I do an ANB on that, it shows me the binary that has the listener open. So that'll show me the netcat.exe. And if that was an injected process, it would show the injected process handle. Not bad. There's GUI versions of that as well, TCP view, cur ports. But I got to show you something kind of fun. All right, so I'm going to rootkit my netcat and hide it. Now, there it is right there. I'm going to rootkit that process ID 1024. All right, now it's gone. If I open TCP view, it's going to show me close everything out here. It's going to show me it's got an identified port or socket with a non-existent process. So remember, the rootkit removed the process name from the process table. It's still showing up in an active connection. So that looks kind of dicey, for sure. I can also, we haven't had our sniffing discussion yet, but I can also run a packet analyzer and capture the actual session, pick that up off the wire as well. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and do that. Well, it's been running for a while. It's choking a little bit. There you go. All right, when I establish a connection, I can sniff that whole thing. We're going to revisit that in our sniffing discussion. But even though it's a hidden process, it's not showing up. I've told it to detach from console. I can exit that. It continues to run. Shows up in Task Manager. I can still capture. I did that in the wrong box here. Sorry about that. What I meant to do is connect to the 203 box. There we go. All right, so I'm still connected to it, but I can't see it running in the task manager. And I don't see any visual indicator, but I can still capture the packets off the wire. Now, again, we're going to have that whole discussion in the sniffers module, which is coming up shortly. All right, so port monitoring, netstat, TCP view, cur ports. Process monitor or process explorer will give you some real-time functionality, but you don't necessarily want to sit there and stare at Process Explorer all day long, or Procmon. All right, Procmon shows me way too much information, and it just keeps coming. So you might want to filter by, say, process name is nc.exe. And now I don't see anything. Okay, until I start sending commands, and then I'll see all sorts of activity. And that's all attributed to netcat.exe. So this gives me registry key, file, disk, network connection, pretty much anything you can think of tracks all its activity. Now, again, I'm probably not going to sit and stare at that all day long in real time. So I might instead use Process Explorer, which is, again, a mighty Mark Russinovich tool, and it is task manager on steroids, to put it lightly. If I scroll down, there's my process hierarchy. Actually see Netcat has a command window hosting a console. If I hover over Netcat, I get the command line that it's running under and the file path. If I right-click it, I've got a search online, which you would probably end up Googling an unfamiliar process anyway. If I right-click it, I've got properties, which takes me through a bunch of really useful tabs. Disk and network utilization, there's my strings. So if I scroll on down here, I'm going to see messages like failed to execute shell, failed to create shell in pipe, failed to create shell out pipe. Well, gee, I wonder if this thing's trying to establish a shell and provide inbound and outbound access. You scroll down a little bit further, and it starts showing you calls, import functions, error messages, help file contents, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is really useful in getting clues on what the software is actually designed to do. Get process, duplicate, handle, exit. There's DLL imports. So again, a lot of these analysis utilities will look for string indicators of import functions, DLLs, API calls, et cetera. All right. So that's the strings aspect. You can look at strings on the image or the disk file or memory image. I can also right-click and check VirusTotal for it. So there's an API for interfacing with VirusTotal. Submits the hash. I'll get my hit ratio. I can also, while I'm at it, just VirusTotal everything. Check every running process against VirusTotal. Not bad. Options for verifying image signatures as well, which will verify the digital signature if it exists on each file. All right, so Process Explorer, really useful stuff. I'm going to close some of these windows down here. Looks like my personal desktop. That's too much information. Too busy. All right, so process monitoring and registry key monitoring and so forth. Registry monitoring, the snapshots before and after installation can indicate registry keys created. And actually, our VirusTotal does that for us as well. So if I go back to the behavior option, this is all the dynamic stuff. So it's got some IP connections out to 23.216, 20.99, files deleted, files dropped, processes created, and that's just the Microsoft sysinternals. If I go to the VirusTotal Juju box, I get a lot more information. Registry key actions, registry key set, processes created, modules loaded, highlighted actions. That's a ton of information from a single free submission. Not bad. All right, Windows Services Monitoring. Okay, services can be malicious, definitely. Services are basically applications that run outside of the security context of the logged on user as part of the OS. So services monitoring, your Windows native service manager is usually completely adequate for analyzing services. There are third-party services monitoring tools. Then your auto starts are always interesting in a malware analysis, since malware will almost invariably be configured to auto start. Auto runs for Windows, also a sysinternals utility from the mighty Mark Russinovich. All right, auto runs for Windows, pretty much all you need. It has an everything tab or breaks it down by login events, Explorer startup, Internet Explorer, scheduled tasks, services, drivers, codecs, boot execute, image hijacks, etc., etc. All right, the everything tab shows everything in one view. You can right-click on the entry, jump to the entry, which takes you to the registry location where it's configured to auto start. Right click, jump to the image, which takes you to the file system object. Right click, check virus total. We've seen that before. Verify signature, etc. You can uncheck it to disable it. You can right click to delete it, remove it entirely. So pretty powerful auto runs enumeration utility for Windows systems. All right, event log monitoring and analysis. So event logs can contain tons of information. Analyzing them manually is always recommended, although that's not necessarily very realistic. So Splunk and other security information event management systems will consolidate your log files in a central location and allow you to analyze them automatically by programming them with correlation rules. And then they also can provide consolidation points for antivirus alerts, etc. So centralizing anything puts it in a central location, which protects the information from being deleted. Log entries, your first order of business is get them off the system being logged, since step 5 in the hacking cycle is what? Covering tracks, clearing log files. If the attacker has already compromised the system, that means they may be able to clear the log files. So centralized logging using a syslog server or SIEM is definitely recommended. All right, and then installation monitoring. Usually your installed programs and features will show you installed programs, but there are third-party utilities like Microsoft, which may give you a little bit more control over removal options and so forth. But at the end of the day, they're still referencing registry keys for installed software. File and folder monitoring. This is integrity check or hash file verification utilities. If I run a hash of a set of system files and I periodically rehash those files, I should see the same hash every time. If the file hash changes, that indicates that the file has been modified, and that might trigger an alert. So signature detection and hash verification are the primary functions of a system integrity verifier or SIV. All right, drivers. So back to our rootkit. All right, MS Info 32, native system utility, will show you system drivers. And this one actually shows that I've got, and I showed you this in a previous module, this one actually shows the rootkit running that's hiding my netcat. So you got msdirectx.sys actually running from the foo rootkit on the desktop, which is kind of weird because most of your drivers run from the System32 drivers folder. All right, so variety of driver management tools out there. A lot of them are aimed at keeping your drivers updated to the latest versions. Driver Reviver, Driver View, Driver Detective, but MS Info 32 does just great on its own. All right, traffic monitoring or analysis. We're going to have the full traffic monitoring analysis discussion in the sniffers module, but I've already showed you a little bit of that. And actually Wireshark, if you were to right click and follow the TCP stream, there's my command line dialog with the Netcat Trojan. So even if it's being hidden by a rootkit in the process table, there's still indicators of compromise, things that can analyze, like open ports or the actual transmissions if it's not encrypted. But we're going to have the complete sniffer protocol analysis discussion in Module 8. So I'm going to stop. And quit. All right, DNS monitoring or resolution. Okay, we're going to have a more in-depth DNS discussion again in the sniffers module, but DNS can actually be used as a covert communications channel. It can also be used for subverting DNS requests, but that's a DNS poisoning discussion. And again, we're going to have that in our sniffers module. So we're going to table that for later discussion, but it's easy to monitor DNS. I'll create some Wireshark filters for it, and we'll see that while these Nursoft utilities are really cool, they're all very useful. They're GUIfications of specific useful functions, but almost everything you see a unique tool for can be done using like a Wireshark or Nmap. But it is nice to have these tools around because they're a quick shortcut to the desktop and they're targeted toward a specific operation. So love the Nersoft utilities. Lots of cool ones for forensics as well. All right, API call monitoring. Okay, APIs, or application programming interfaces, again, are parts of the Windows OS allowing external applications to access information, file systems, and so forth. So you have human interaction, you have process interaction, that's APIs. They can be attacked like anything else. The API monitor actually allows you to monitor and display the Win32 API calls made by applications. So this is also like monitoring requests to the local operating system. It is. All right, system calls monitoring. strace can actually pull system calls. So all three of these, like DLLs and import functions, APIs, and call monitoring, you're actually watching what is being requested from the operating system. So strace, for example, intercepts and records systems calls by a process and the signals received by the process, and that's a Linux-specific utility. All right, virus detection methods. Now, we've run through this a bit already. There's scanning, which is old reliable, but also not necessarily efficient in the fact that we can't possibly scan for everything. Integrity checking, again, that's checking against signatures or predetermined hash sets. Interception, monitoring requests to the operating system. We just got done talking about that. APIs, calls, DLLs. Code emulation. You're running the software in a sandboxed environment, which is exactly what VirusTotal did in the behavior tab. And looking at what it does. Now, the differencing states, when you run a differencing utility that just gives you a before and after snapshot, you want to remember that not everything in that before and after snapshot is attributed to the malware. It's two different points in time. When you're using something that monitors specifically that process action, then it's a lot more precise and a lot more accurate. So code emulation in an environment that's designed to specifically track what the process is doing is your best option. And then heuristics in general is just looking for suspicious functions. So and that actually falls into a variety of techniques, but when I analyze a file and say, hey, this thing's trying to download a file, install it, and then send capture files out, that looks weird. Heuristics look for suspicious functions, and that's a short, basic definition, but it maps to pretty much all the different variants of heuristics. So you're looking for something suspicious. You're more likely to get false positives with non-signature based detection, since it could incorrectly interpret that function looks suspicious. All right, there's a variety of anti-blank software out there: anti-Trojan, antivirus, anti-worm, anti-spyware, et cetera, et cetera. Generally speaking, a all-purpose, multifaceted AV software is adequate for most purposes. Windows Defender, for being free, not bad. Kaspersky, always like Kaspersky. McAfee, Norton, Bitdefender, Hitman Pro, Malwarebytes, et cetera, lots of them. And again, none of them will pick up everything. There's no real one size fits all. And a lot of times it's personal preference. All right, Bitdefender, Alien Vault, and that's one flavor of fileless malware detection tools. Again, those are scanning memory. Microsoft Defender for endpoints, and that is going to wrap up our module. All right, so you got a pretty good feel for the different flavors of malware, how malware gets created and distributed. A lot of emphasis on social engineering, potentially for the infection, the detection side of things, signature scanning, heuristics. You got a pretty good feel for what we're looking for when we analyze malware. Now, again, that's a shorter discussion. If you want the full malware forensics discussion, definitely come on back for CHFI. But that's going to wrap us up for Module 7. You got some really cool labs in this module, so enjoy the labs, and we'll see you back here for Module 8.